So, if everybody would like to come inside, please. Just give me a few minutes till they all can sit down. There's a lot of noise. Okay, so I am happy to greet you all tonight, this evening, for our conference. We have an online conference due to climate, let's say we had strikes and problems, and we decided last minute with Ms. Badhe to hold this session online because she would have problems to come over here, so this was the best solution. I'm happy to greet you all tonight over here. So we are having this conference in the conference row of our exposition impact, and the exposition impact is due to the man being the impact on the biodiversity. Since we have a crisis in the biodiversity, we are having a real nice exposition about this and to create awareness for the public. And so we have a whole row of conferences, and tonight we have Dr. Renuka Badhe. And tonight she's here from the European Polar Board, General Secretary, and she will explain or tell us much more about the biodiversity in the polar regions, not just over the polar bear and the penguins, but also all other kinds of living beings that have rough conditions to survive, but all about these special living beings in the polar regions. So I would say I would pass on the word to Renuka, since she's a specialist and she's also a PhD in the Southern Ocean about the phytoplanktons and the physiology, sorry. So I would pass it on to you, Renuka, since you're the specialist, and I'm very happy and proud to have you tonight for this online conference. So enjoy. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I'm super happy to also do this talk, though I do have to apologize that I was not able to come in person. As Monique just explained, that there were some issues with trains, and it would have meant me nearly making a full day's journey by train to be there for an hour and a half, and then another full day journey by train. So we decided to do this in the style of COVID times, online by Zoom, and I hope we will still be able to have a good interaction despite it just being on Zoom. I'm happy to respond to any questions as you may have them. So today we are talking about the, most people have heard about either the polar bears or penguins. So today we want to look at a lot of the other things that exist at the polar regions. And because there's so many things, I am not going to dive very deep into individual things that I talk about. It'll be much more an on the surface but very broad lecture today. So why do we go to the poles? It's cold, it's inhospitable. This is the kind of thing that you get to see for most of the time that you're there. This is in summer, by the way, this is not winter. But we still go to the poles. It takes a huge, long journey to get there, especially to the south. This, by the way, is one of my absolute favorite places. It's called the Lemaire Channel, and even in bad weather, it looks absolutely beautiful. But the weather can become like this within minutes. And most of the times, this is what you will see from your ship. A lot of the pictures that you see today have blue skies, but those are the very few times that we get good weather. Most of the times, believe me, the weather is like this. People just cannot take pictures then. That's why you see these amazing blue skies and sunshine in polar photography when you see them, because in these kind of conditions, it's difficult to take pictures. What you will see today is really, I mean, this is probably the worst kind of sea condition you will see in the except for one more video. This is the kind of sea condition you will see in the photos. This is because I'm probably the worst oceanographer in the world. I get super seasick in ships. And so when it's any worse than what I just showed you in this video, I'm normally in my bed clutching the sides and trying not to puke my guts out. So that's the other reason why. Going to the north is just slightly easier, only slightly, but the weather gets bad there too. What you will see in today's talk is that a lot of my pictures will have either a little green arrow at the top right corner or a little white arrow at the top right corner. The green arrow pointing upwards indicates that the photo or the thing that I'm talking about is from the Arctic. And the white arrow that's pointing downwards generally indicates the thing that I'm talking about is from the Antarctic. So what is the Arctic? So if you see this photo, the pink is basically the daily sea ice extent. The Arctic is water that is surrounded by land. And this land is governed by the Arctic Council that is made up of countries that have territories in the Arctic. One more thing about the Arctic is that we have indigenous people, more than 4 million of them, that live in the Arctic and call it home. My experience and my travel to the Arctic has been mostly around Svalbard, which is also called Spitsbergen, which is shown here in the green round, and it's almost at the same in line with the top of Greenland, as you can see here. Now the Antarctic is almost the exact opposite, well, polar opposite geographically, but also while the Arctic is water surrounded by land, Antarctic is land which is surrounded by water. This is the ocean that surrounds it is completely free flowing. So you have this entire mass, water mass, flows extremely fast. And then as it comes closer to the Drake Passage, which is what I've indicated here, that entire mass of water is kind of squeezed through this little gap between the Antarctic Peninsula and the southern tip of South America. And guess where my work area was? Around this area itself. And this is really the known as the worst sea in the world. And with my work, I've experienced quite a few what are called as Drake shakes, kind of something like this. And if you see in a few seconds, you'll see what happens. This day was about 8-meter swells, so not too bad all in all given. Swells can be even bigger than this. They're known to be, go up to about 2 or 3 stories high in a standard building. So they can go really high. I've been working in this region for more than 20 years now, both going to the field, but I also try and communicate about what science is going on in a policy relevant field. So how do we go to the polar regions? We get to these generally by one of these beauties. This is the Araon, which is the South Korean icebreaker that goes both to the Arctic and Antarctic. You can also go by other ships and also tall boats go to the polar regions. The other boats that go there are the tourist ships, and a lot of tourist ships also do quite valuable science particularly in the Antarctic, but also in the Arctic. They not only include citizens in the science and generate interest in the regions and protecting the regions like that, but they also, a lot of tourist operators also offer space for scientists to go and conduct their research in the polar regions. We even have tiny little sailing vessels that go in the Antarctic. And if you can't see the sailboat there, that's the little sailboat. And this picture is from the Antarctic. So so far, the pictures I've shown you are really feeding your standard understanding of what the polar regions are. They're white, they're icy, they're snowy, difficult to get to, cold, inhospitable. But why do we go to the polar regions? Polar regions are considered to be the laboratory of the world. Both Arctic and Antarctic offer fantastic opportunities to study areas of land and sea that have not been touched by humans so far. Um, there are some aspects that are affected by what we do here in not the polar regions, like plastics and such. But in general, the polar regions are still considered quite unique. It gives us a unique opportunity to study different conditions without a direct interference from humans. Polar regions also have a lot of life. So in this picture, you can see that um, there's a few researchers sitting there and trying to take samples. If you can see them, the tiny little colored dots in the middle of the picture. And what they study is a lot of what they were studying, particularly is the Svalbard plant life. There is quite a lot of plant life in the polar regions, particularly in the north, including a lot of flowering plants as well. So one of the ways that they adapt to the living conditions there is that the growth is quite stunted. So you will not see any big trees, for example, in Svalbard. And another way that they try and protect themselves from the cold is that they form really these tight balls. And you can see a few examples of different plants that do that. They form these tight balls that keep the delicate stem and the upper parts of the roots that are protected from the cold and wind. Another another thing that the plants do sometimes is to have very fine hair, and these hair also protect these plants from the cold that exists in the Arctic. Apart from plants, there's also mushrooms, and this particular mushroom is actually edible as well. It grows in tundras and all pastures around the Arctic. It's edible when it's kind of this color, and once they become brown and they kind of with age they will break further open, and once they break open they release their brown powdery spore mass, and it almost looks like smoke when they do that. I haven't been able to capture a good picture of the fungus doing that, but I thought an edible form would be a good solution to show you. Apart from fungi, you also have something called lichens. Lichens are, they're absolutely beautiful. I love them. But they're a complex life form that are basically a symbiotic partnership between two separate organisms. So a fungus and an algae. A lot of these lichens are very, very slow growing. And we understand and we know what the growth rates of these lichens are in many cases. So you can really, from the size of the circle that the lichen makes, you can actually estimate a growth. You can actually estimate the age of that lichen as well sometimes. In the Antarctic as well, there is some greenery. There are mosses and a bit of grass. There's tussock grass that's present, that's seen even in the Antarctic Peninsula side, so on continental Antarctic as well. We also have other mosses, especially this beautiful brown growth that was seen on Deception Island. Is absolutely gorgeous. And this is a really interesting thing with mosses in Antarctica and in Signy Island. Recently, they were able to take moss. They were able to take like a core of the permafrost on Signy Island, and they could regenerate the moss that was frozen for nearly 1,500 years. And that moss is now, once it's given the right conditions and it's not frozen anymore. It has actually started growing and producing gametophytes and stuff as well. So it's absolutely stunning that you have this life that kind of, you keep something in the freezer and then you bring it out and it can live again. So you have moss on land, but in the sea you have algae, and these algae can also be on the ice. In this picture, if you can see, there's two very clearly colored spots. There's one which is slightly green, and there's one that's a little bit reddish. Both of these are uh, sea sea ice algae that are quite common in both the Arctic and Antarctic as well, both in normal water and also in seawater. The phytoplankton that you see here, these are the unicellular algae that are in the water. And these are really called the grass of the water. The Southern Ocean has, in particular, has a vast amount of capacity to grow phytoplankton and thus absorb CO2. An indication of how much plankton grows in the oceans can be studied by using satellites. And however, the satellites only tend to study the top bit of the ocean. So we still need to go there and understand exactly how much plankton are growing. And then we can calibrate the satellites. So we don't have to go there quite as often. We've seen the grass, and then above that, what eats the grass is something called krill. Krill are small shrimp-like animals that grow up to like about 6 centimeters in length, and they live quite a few years. They live up to 5 years, and technically these are plankton, but they behave more like little fish because they can swim quite well. These krill live in swarms, so they live in huge, dense gatherings of more than 10,000 krill each in each cubic meter of seawater. And krill swarms can range from being quite small, a few meters, or they can go on for miles and miles and contain thousands and thousands of tons of krill. The food web, so the things that the animals that exist in the ocean and that eat each other, and that interaction is called a food web. And the food web in the Southern Ocean is fairly simple as compared to the other parts of the world. It's not just single species, but there are fewer species in the Southern Ocean than as compared to the other parts of the world. And the krill is really one of like a keystone species that plays an extremely important role within the Southern Ocean food web. One of the things that eat the krill are the penguins. And what they do after eating them is they poop out the guano contains pink color. And so one of the amazing side effects of the penguins eating krill is that we can actually study penguins from space. So you can look at satellite pictures, and the ones that I just showed you before are basic Google Earth pictures, and of something called Cuerville Island, which has some big colonies of penguins. And you can really see, even just from simple Google Map pictures, that the guano stains, you can really clearly see that. And you can go further and really assess how many penguins are living as well in each of these colonies. And scientists have also found new colonies because people haven't gone to all parts of the Antarctic. So obviously we don't know how many penguins live there exactly. But in particular for, say, emperor penguins, it is possible to detect newer colonies, to see where the penguins are moving from one place to another, to detect new colonies that come up using satellite pictures like this. So let's talk a little bit more about the emperor penguin now. These are one of the biggest size species of penguins, and they also dive deeper than any other bird that's known to us. Most of their dives are between 100 and 200 meters, but occasionally they can go a lot deeper. And the deepest dive we have on record is nearly 560 meters deep. So this is absolutely amazing. One of the US astronauts, Jessica Meir, who is now an astronaut, was earlier an Antarctic marine biologist. And she used to study the diving behavior of different penguins as well. So I thought that might be something to interest you. So how do the emperor penguins deal with things like laying eggs when they're on the ice and there's really no material for them to make a nest and provide any protection to the eggs? So what happens is when the female lays the egg, the male penguin will pick it up and put it in its brood pouch, which you can see here. The egg is just kind of a little bit exposed, but what the male is doing there is turning that egg around so that the warmth reaches all parts of that egg equally. So within the skin fold, the egg can be kept extremely warm to about 38 degrees, while outside temperatures can drop well below zero. So minus 30 or minus 35 degrees C as well. The females, once they lay an egg, they give the egg to the male and then they depart to do the feeding. And then it's the male's duty to not only keep the egg warm, but also when the chick hatches to keep the chick warm for the first few weeks as well. The female then comes back after a little while, after about 4 months of fasting for the males, and then takes over keeping the chick warm. And then both the male and female take turns feeding as the chick starts growing. Here you see a juvenile penguin, and this is just as the penguin is starting to get its adult set of feathers. And there's a little transmitter attached to it, so we can study how and where the penguins go to. So in order to protect those areas better, it is good to have that kind of information. Another kind of penguin we have is the Gen 2 penguin. So this is a Gen 2 penguin, and it's a nice visual of how the penguin can keep the food that it catches inside. It's got a little spiky tongue with all the spikes pointed inwards. So once it tries to swallow something, that thing that it swallowed cannot come back out. It's trapped in with those spiky bits of its tongue. And one question that we're quite frequently asked is why don't penguins' feet freeze? You can see that the penguins' feet are quite orange. They have amazing nails to grip rocks and stones as they walk over them. And they have a really good blood flow to their feet as well. So they can actually control how much blood that they can send to their feet. They also have a type of blood vessel system where that reduces the heat loss from their bodies. And both of these things together help the penguins' feet not to freeze. Penguins are also slow on land, but they're amazingly fast in water. And this is the kind of pictures that I have, about 50 of these pictures to 2 pictures where I get proper penguins porpoising. Because by the time they've jumped up and down, all you get on a picture is just a splash. So they can be very, very fast when they're in the water. This is a Gen 2 penguin with its nest up in the rocks. And one of the predators of the Gen 2 penguin is a bird called skua. And this skua learns new behaviors as well. So this is something that I saw just this year, and it was appreciated as a new behavior by quite a lot of people, particularly in the area that I was going for the first time. This may be a behavior in other areas, but in this area they spotted it for the first time. That 2 skuas took in turns to disturb the penguin. And so one would disturb it by pecking the tail feathers of the penguin, and the other skua would come in to jump and grab the egg when the penguin was disturbed. So I saw quite a few eggshells, so they were really quite successful in this strategy this year. So yeah, very clever birds. You can see the really strong hooked beak that they have, that they can grab things and run. They also predate on small penguin chicks as well, and they'll do the same thing. They'll try and um, get the parent to respond to one of the pair of skuas, and the other skua grabs the chick and runs. There's other birds that are also predators. They're the southern giant petrels, as they're shown here, and they are existing in two different formats. So one is the general format that everyone sees, is the dark gray format that we see on the top left corner. But about 10% of these are also quite white. So they're called the um, southern giant petrel. And it's really amazing to see how well they are camouflaged within their background. So if you see, there's a couple of birds behind the white petrel in the bottom right, and also the top, you can see how that coloration really matches the background that they nest in. So it's really difficult to, to see the nest because you're seeing it from a distance. And unless they kind of do something like fly or put their wings out or something, it's very, very difficult to spot them. So there's so many other birds that are there in the southern part as well. You have terns, Arctic terns, Antarctic terns. You have Antarctic shags, the ptarmigans, of course, lots more penguins. And then you also have something, you have the albatross as well. And the albatross has one of the largest wingspan of any living bird. They are such skilled flyers that they can go for years without touching land, and they fly really close to the water. So you can see the top two pictures. They're flying extremely close to the water. Sometimes you even see their wingtip just about touch the water surface. But they are absolutely, absolutely brilliant. For taking off, though, they are very, very clumsy. So the bottom picture shows how they have to kind of run on the water to take off. It's quite a funny sight, but it's beautiful once they set soar. Once they kind of set sail and they are floating on the water, then they're absolutely fantastic. They can also smell food in the water from several miles away, so they have a very, very good sense of smell as well. Their lifespan can be more than 50 years, and they can raise chicks well into their adulthood as well. The birds in the Arctic, there's also quite a few birds in the Arctic as well. So one of the birds that makes a reappearance from my previous slide is the tern that's on the top left hand side. And this is again an absolutely amazing bird that journeys from the Arctic to the Antarctic each year. And it has officially the longest animal migration of any kind that has been recorded, right up from Greenland up to the Antarctic. And so these are tiny little birds. So the size of the bird is like that. It's about that big. And it's only a few grams. And it can fly such amazing distances. Another bird you find in the Arctic is the guillemot. And the the cliffs behind it, they're full of these guillemot nests. And you can see a few guillemots standing there. And one of the things that they do is once the chick starts growing up, before the chick can fly, the parents will encourage the chick to kind of just set sail from the cliff. And then the chick kind of desperately tries to glide and make sure that it lands in the water. Because under the cliff edges are little Arctic foxes that are waiting to predate on these little chicks. Those chicks want to go to the water because it's a much better opportunity for a lot more food and much quicker growth. So it's much more about the food and faster growth rather than less predation. But both of these aspects make sure that these chicks will jump from the cliff and hopefully they go up to the water. The Arctic foxes are quite small animals, and they live on the smaller birds that exist on in the Arctic. And they also change color, so their coat changes color according to the season. And again, amazingly well blended into the background. There's actually an Arctic fox here. I was standing here with like a long lens. People, like at least 3 people around me said, "Oh, there's a fox there." I could not see it for my life. It took me nearly 5 minutes to spot that fox and get this picture. So they are really good hunters and they blend so well into the background in the Arctic. What else exists in the Arctic? There's also reindeer that exist in the Arctic. And then there's walruses that exist in the Arctic as well. Both of these survive the harsh winters by building up their fat reserves in summer. And so they can last in the long winters with sparser resources than available. Walruses are definitely one of my favorite creatures. They have these special whiskers, and also they have lips that are able to kind of create a slight vacuum. So they really like to eat mollusks. So when they have mollusks, they can't break the shell open, but what they do is kind of create a thing and they suck the inside of the mollusk and they will eat that. So it's really amazing that they love oysters as much as we do. And they're able to actually eat these mollusks without doing much to them. Walruses are also quite fast on land. In fact, they have a speed that is similar to humans, an average speed of a human running. So they can run quite fast on all the 4 flippers that they have. And the way they ensure that they are able to dive, they are also one of the very deep divers. The way they ensure that they can dive safely is that they can actually slow their own heartbeat down. So they're able to dive much deeper distances for much longer. They migrate with different ice flows, so little bits of ice that are floating on water like you see here. And they hang out in tightly packed herds. Uh, the most amazing thing about the walruses are its tusks, and they are actually like canine teeth, but they never stop growing. And the walruses use those teeth to break open the holes in the ice, and also obviously to fight other walruses and to try and haul themselves out onto these ice floes. One of the um, things that walruses have to fight off are polar bears, and polar bears in the Arctic, male polar bears especially, can get extremely large. So they can weigh up to 800 kilos, a male polar bear, and they're about twice the size of a female polar bear. The male can get about 3 meters long, which makes it the largest bear species, and also the largest land carnivore in the world. Polar bears can swim really well, and they can swim constantly for days at a time. The large paws that they have are specially adapted for swimming, so they can really paddle through the water very easily. And they'll use their hind legs held flat at the back like rudders, so they can change their direction using their hind legs, and the front legs are used for propelling. Polar bear's life is spent on hunting because very few, less than 10% of their hunts are successful. So they really have to keep hunting. And one of their main preys is seals. So different seals, and they kind of hunt them in several different ways as well. What else exists in the ocean? These are humpback whales. Humpback whales can grow up to 15 meters, and you have whale populations that are seen right up from the Arctic up to the Antarctic. Um, but this particular humpback whale that I'll talk about is from the Antarctic. These are called baleen whales. So whales are of two types normally. You have either baleen whales or you have toothed whales. The whales with teeth, like um, that's like the definition says, and the baleen whales have little plates of hair that try and trap the krill that the whales eat. So those little traps of hair are called baleen, and that's why these whales are called baleen whales. And one of the big examples of a baleen whale is a humpback whale. Humpback whales are also known to have a very long migration, probably the longest annual migration of any mammal. And they're known to travel, the populations that travel are known to travel from the Antarctic Peninsula right up to the equator sometimes. And you can see these migrations across the different oceans. One of the things that I saw in the recent trip was a way that the whale feeds, and it's called lunge feeding. And what it does is, remember I talked about these krill balls where you have tens of thousands of krill per square meter. What the whale does is it kind of lunges upwards towards this ball of krill with its mouth wide open, and then kind of just sucks the whole thing up, and then it'll let the water out, but the baleen trap all the krill in. So if you see, this is the whale kind of lunging up and swallowing all of the water. And you can see it's the throat area is completely like expanded to get all of that krill. We were also very lucky to see two whales do this in tandem with each other. So I can just repeat. So these are the two whales coming up and really like giving us an absolute textbook demonstration of lunge feeding in the Antarctic. One of the other things that is peculiar about humpbacks are their tails, and they're called the flukes. And these flukes are useful for people to recognize what the different whales are. So they are kind of like almost like fingerprints in humans. And there's, if you ever go out into the sea, and if you're lucky enough to see a whale and a humpback whale and able to photograph this fluke, you can submit it to citizen science projects like Happy Whale, where they will collect data about the fluke where you picked it up, so your geo positions, and they will log it. So we can really look at how the whales are behaving, where they're going, how many whales there are, and so many other things with the help of just little photographs that everyone takes. So if you are able to take that, please, I would request you to go and submit your data to some of these databases. You also have in the Southern Ocean, another thing that goes into the sea is a big thing that goes into the sea is the southern elephant seal, one of the specimen that you see here giving a side eye to a penguin. These are also amazing divers. They can dive anywhere from 400 to 1,000 meters and anywhere up to 20 minutes. The deepest recorded dive of an elephant seal is about 2,000, just above 2,000 meters. But their average depth where they dive for food is between 400 and 1,000 meters. To stay underwater for so long, these elephant seals, to stay underwater for so long and also so deep, these elephant seals actually exhale before they go in. So they get all of the gases out of their bodies, because otherwise they'll suffer from decompression sickness if not, because they go so deep. To maintain their oxygen levels, what they do is they have a lot more hemoglobin in their blood and in their muscles. about twice the volume of blood they have as compared to land mammals of the same size as well. So not only do they have twice the amount of blood, but they have double the amount of hemoglobin as well. So that's the way they are able to have oxygen when they're diving so deep for so long. They're also one of the few seals that molt. So I can really, I feel sorry for this seal, and you can imagine how itchy it must be feeling just here while it's molting and waiting for the outer layer to get rubbed off. Another seal is the fur seal that you see in Antarctica. These are extremely territorial and very, very fast. A lot of beaches, particularly on the subantarctic islands, are very much crowded with fur seals. And you have to very carefully make your way on that beach to get to the research station you're going to. So these are the last kind that I will talk about. The last seal kind I will talk about today is the Weddell seals. And again, these have these amazing whiskers, unlike other seals. And what they do is they use their whiskers to feel for the feel for vibrations, because they're very sensitive to movement, and that's the way they're able to find their predator, their prey, even when they are in the middle of winter, in the dark season. They also have very good underwater vision, so they are able to. One of the ways it is thought that they utilize this is that they go to the depth and look up. So they're able to look at silhouettes of the different fish, and they're able to hunt them. This is one of the ways that the scientists think they're able to hunt. Excuse me. Apologies for that. So we talked about a whole lot of stuff, but we've left out so much more. These are just a few examples of the things that were found just around one research station in Antarctica. This is you can see a lot of sea spiders, you can see starfish, you can see anemones, you can see coral, you can see so many different things. And this is an image one of my friends created from the British Antarctic Survey. Both of these images, I see they're unfortunately missing the credits. They should be credited to the British Antarctic Survey. And they give a really good idea of the absolute amazing diversity that exists in the oceans, in the polar oceans. And we normally get to see only the charismatic species like the penguins or polar bears. But all of these are just as amazing. One of the ways, if you want to kind of keep looking at these things and keep abreast of some of the research that's going on, is to look at things like Polardex, which gives you a really good idea of all of the different research stations and ships that are around in the polar regions. Have a go. It is Polardex. It is on the European Polar Board website. Have a go, look at it for further information on the different research bases, and you can follow on a whole lot of science that goes on in these bases as well. Every time we go to the polar regions, we are, as scientists, as researchers, we are very much aware that every single time we go, we leave a little bit of an environmental footprint. So all of the people that go to the polar regions are extremely aware of this, and they take the decision whether to go and where to go to with a lot of consideration. So they will think whether it's necessary to go, why they should go, how many people should go, how long they should go for. All of those things are taken into consideration before a decision is made to go and visit a particular place. Like I said before, the polar regions are a natural laboratory. So, this is one of the few places in the world where humankind has not made a direct impact. So this gives researchers an opportunity to study this land. And even with those decisions, we try and ensure that the balance of the environmental footprint of visiting the polar regions is balanced by the sheer amount of science that we get when we do go and visit there. With respect to the global climate, the polar regions are playing an extremely important role, and the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change has been warning us for many years now that we may be close to an edge. We are in fact close to an edge with the respect of effects of the climate change that may be brought out. The IPCC had a special report recently on the ocean and cryosphere in a changing climate. It makes quite sobering reading. So if you're so inclined, I do suggest have a look at that. Their policy summary is super good, easy to digest and easy to understand what the different things are, what the things that are going on are. And the last thing I'll say to you that we talked about penguins and polar bears in one sentence right from the topic of the talk, but they don't ever meet. So if anyone asks you, or if anyone shows you a picture with penguins and polar bears in the same scene, that's not correct. The polar bears live in the north, penguins live in the south, and there's an entire world between them. And I hope we all can work together to protect this entire world and the polar regions and the many animals that live there, both in the north and south. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Renuka. I guess this is a little bit difficult. I would propose, if people are interested to ask a question, that they come up to the screen maybe and ask their question. That would be the best.
Yeah, happy to do that.
If anybody has a question, you're allowed to come up. No questions? Well, I would have one because you said that the human being has had not an impact yet, but
yes.
How is it? Are you really sure, or how is it with the microplastic?
Yes, so that's the caveat I gave when I said that they've not had a direct impact yet. So what happens is microplastics have, not just microplastics, but you can even see things like smoke or natural events like volcanoes. When they've exploded, you can actually see these events in the ice on both Arctic and Antarctic. And that's one of the ways scientists use to date where things are in the ice core that they drill as well. So yes, I did say, but it's more of a direct impact I was talking about. So no direct interference. People haven't been there. So we can definitely remove that out of the equation when we are looking at a certain place in both the Arctic and Antarctic. In fact, in the Antarctic, there are also areas which are specially protected. So they, you cannot enter those areas, and they are protected and kept that way so that we have kind of a baseline to compare things with as well.
I imagine. Any other questions?
I thought someone would say that. That's why I added that caveat before.
Sorry. Any questions? You're glad you want to come. So.
Hello. I would like to know if the migration has changed of the animals, the birds or the caribous or the whales due to climate change, because I know that it has a big impact on the polar regions. So.
Yeah, so one of the things that you see, more in global living creatures is that they're slowly, some of the species particularly in the ocean, are slowly moving northwards. because the seas where they used to live are getting warmer and warmer, so they're shifting polewards. So this has been one of the clear indicators that the changing climate, i.e. the increasing temperatures in the ocean particularly, are really affecting the species, and they're slowly moving, their range is slowly shifting towards the poles. When we look at the polar creatures, they don't have much place to go to because they're very specially adapted. Like, I spoke about a few of the adaptations today. They're very specially adapted to the regions, to that temperature. So they don't have many places they can escape to. The general aspect of migrations is that the animals are normally chasing for food, and the food that they consume is changing their pattern of where they are. So you can see some differences in some of the animals for sure. So, some of the penguins may have to go further to find food, particularly if they're like emperor penguins or something. They have to cross quite a long time, and then they have a small time in which to kind of recover after a long period of fasting, like the male penguins I was telling you about. So they have to go a little bit further. They have to dive a bit more because they aren't able to quickly find the food that they otherwise would have. So most of the migrations are generally due to the food that they are seeking, and they're not getting them. So they tend to travel a little bit further. Hopefully that's answered your question.
Yeah, it's answered the question. Very good. Any other questions? You can come here.
Thank you, Renuka. I think you showed us clearly how special and how important those areas are also for the world itself and for the population. And there's been so much great scientific research done there. What is the impact of this scientific research? How can one channel it to those who make decisions? And what is the status of protection in the north for the Arctic, in the south for the Antarctic? And do you see any changes of the behavior of the countries that one are active there? For example, we're in Spitsbergen, and they have a very special rule on countries having economic activities or potential. And the other thing is about the Antarctic. Thank you.
That's a whole lecture.
Yeah.
So, okay, so in short, both the Arctic and Antarctic, parts of the Arctic are quite well protected. Recently, countries signed an agreement to kind of prevent any fishing from taking place in the Central Arctic Ocean. Otherwise, in the Arctic, most of the protection really takes place through the Arctic Council and countries' own economic areas. So they kind of, each country has its own regulations within the sea that it owns. The Arctic Council does have protective measures. They do decide on, areas that they would like to protect and for what reasons. In the Antarctic is slightly different. The entire Antarctic continent and the oceans around it, the ocean south of 60 South and the continent is protected by something called the Antarctic Treaty. And you don't have any one country that says that this is my land. It's, all of the claims that the different countries had are held in kind of suspended animation. So they're there, but they are not accepted and no new claims to land can be made. So this entire continent of Antarctica is governed by something called the Antarctic Treaty, where everyone who signs up to it puts that into their national regulations that they will protect that area, and that there is no commercial activity allowed except for tourism, and I'll deal with that later. There's no military activity allowed, and Antarctica is really the only continent on the planet that has been set aside for peace and science. And the beauty of the treaty is that it was signed right in the middle of the Cold War. So in the midst of what could be a very damaging situation, a very fantastic thing came out. One of the things that came out was absolutely fantastic, this Antarctic Treaty. Even if you're not a legal scholar, have a quick look at that. It's a very short treaty. As far as legal treaties are concerned, it's only 14 articles, and it's eloquent in how it states that the Antarctic will be set aside for peace, science, and the future, really. One of the things that it does is to ensure that any data that is collected in the Antarctic has to be made public because of its thing about making sure that this continent is for science. And that's all of these regulations together keep it as a really good example for other places and other places to how to govern things. So even the space, the treaties that govern space are also looking at the Antarctic Treaty and how it works as an example to follow potentially when they start looking at that. For Svalbard is governed by something called the Svalbard Treaty, which is kind of similar to the Antarctic Treaty, but in Svalbard you have had a lot of economic activity, and it's Norwegian. The Norwegian authorities provide support for the science that take place. So you have areas in Svalbard that are set aside for science. There's a little town called Ny-Ålesund in Svalbard, which has all of the scientific bases from many different countries that have put up their scientific bases there, and they do science from there. So there's both of these regions. They are acceptable to listen to the science and what the science says. For the Antarctic Treaty, you have an organization called the Scientific Committee on Antarctic Research, and that's the scientific advisor to the Antarctic Treaty. And they have the authority to raise issues of concern to the policymakers that sit in the Antarctic Treaty. Similar to that, you have a similar parallel organization in the Arctic called the International Arctic Science Council that also brings together Arctic researchers to raise issues of concern to policymakers at all levels. Policymakers around the world are listening to the issues that are going on. It's not only that we are affecting things here, and that's with the climate change, the polar regions are getting affected, but the message has to change a little bit, or is changing already, about the amount of impact that the polar regions can cause the rest of the world. And that message has slowly started to really be strongly put out. Those kind of effects, I mean, I'm sitting here in the Netherlands, and one of the first posters that you see, and I took this picture a couple of days ago when I went to the airport. It's literally this. Bear with me for a second. And the picture says, "Welcome below sea level." Most of the country here in the Netherlands is already below sea level. And the amount of impact that the polar regions melting can have, it can play havoc in this country. I mean, I trust the Dutch engineering, absolutely. I bought a house close to the coast. That's how much I trust the Dutch engineering. But the potential for impact that the polar regions can have is enormous around the world. And that message has been very strong recently. And that's the message that the policymakers are now receiving. since the last few years. And that has started turning the wheels slowly now. So people are understanding the sheer amount of impact that this can have. Already in some of the parts of the world, these impacts are seen in the low-lying islands, for example. You're already seeing a lot of impacts. There've already been people classed as climate refugees for the first time a few years ago. So these messages are reaching the policymakers, and they are having an effect. Hopefully, Carlo, I've answered all of your questions in a very short 5-minute lecture.
Yes. Any other questions? There seem to be no more questions.
All good?
Renuka?
Everyone's tired after a long meeting?
No, I think it was very interesting and beautifully demonstrated with all the pictures.
Oh,
Very
thank
well
you.
explained, yeah. And for the Grand Public too, very well done. I have to thank you very much. And it's a pity we didn't see each other in person, but this was
Some
good.
other time.
Yeah, a good solution like this. So thank you very much again. And
Thank you very much for the invitation, and I wish you all a happy evening, a nice evening.
same to you. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye. Have a nice evening, everyone.
That was for you. Thank you. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.
Oops, my hair. So.